Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be tackling the Khazar Empire.
The Khazars.
Yeah, have you ever heard of them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they were a Turkic empire, flourished around the 7th to 10th century CE, controlled a huge amount of land in what's now like southern Russia and Ukraine.
Oh, wow. So they were around for a while.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they were kind of a big deal, huh?
Big deal. Major force in Eastern Europe and Central Asia.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what makes them so interesting to like study and think about now?
Well, one of the most fascinating things about them is that they converted to Judaism.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
A whole empire, predominantly Turkic in origin, adopts Judaism sometime between the 8th and 9th centuries.
That's amazing. Like, why Judaism?
Right.
Of all the religions out there.
So it's a really unique phenomenon.
Yeah.
In history.
Was it like a political thing?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. Some historians think that, maybe it wasn't so much about like religious belief, but more about strategy.
Strategy.
Yeah. Think about it. The Khazars, they were surrounded by powerful neighbors.
Yeah.
You had the Christian Byzantine Empire
Oh, yeah.
on one side and the Islamic Caliphate on the other.
Yeah. So they're right in the middle.
Right in the middle. So maybe choosing Judaism was a way to stay neutral.
Like a third way.
Exactly. A third way. It let them keep their independence and maybe even like play the two sides off against each other.
I see. So they didn't want to pick a side.
Right.
Yeah.
Picking a side in that religious tug of war could have been disastrous.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So how do we know that that's what they were doing?
Well, that's the thing. It's really hard to know for sure.
Yeah.
The historical record on the Khazars, it's pretty spotty.
Really?
Yeah. We have to rely on accounts from like their neighbors,
Oh, I see.
Arab chroniclers, Byzantine historians,
Okay.
Jewish travelers.
So not the Khazars themselves.
And those accounts, they're often biased.
Yeah.
They have their own perspectives. It's kind of like trying to put together a puzzle, but you're missing some pieces.
Okay.
You can get the general picture,
Yeah.
but the details, they're really hard to pin down.
I see. So it's kind of a historical mystery.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah. Well, whenever I start thinking about these ancient empires and religions and stuff, I always start thinking about like, what's their legacy?
Oh, yeah.
What did they leave behind?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's one where we have to be really careful because there are some claims floating around online about the Khazars and how they've had like this massive influence on everything.
Really?
Yeah. From the genes of modern Jewish populations to like major historical events, even revolutions.
Revolutions. I don't see how.
It gets pretty wild.
So what are people claiming about the Khazars and this lasting influence?
Okay, so one of the big ones is this idea that the Khazars had a like unique genetic makeup, and that because they converted to Judaism, their descendants make up a huge chunk of modern Jewish communities.
Whoa.
Particularly in Europe.
So they're basically saying that the Khazars like redefined Jewish demographics.
That's essentially the claim.
So shouldn't there be like some kind of genetic marker or something that links these modern populations back to the Khazars?
That's what you'd think, right?
Yeah.
But genetics, it's a powerful tool for understanding ancestry, but it's not that simple.
Right.
There's no like find the Khazar gene.
Yeah.
There are so many things that make it complicated. Migrations.
Oh, yeah.
People intermarrying.
Right.
And the biggest problem is we just don't have DNA samples from the Khazar period.
Oh, right.
To compare to, yeah.
So it's like you're trying to bake a cake, but you're missing half the ingredients. Yeah. You can guess at what it might have tasted like.
Yeah, you have an idea.
But you'll never really know for sure. So it's more about probabilities and patterns than like actual proof.
Yeah.
And even if there was some Khazar ancestry in certain Jewish communities, wouldn't that just be like one small part of a much bigger, more complex story?
Exactly. Jewish history is incredibly complex.
Yeah.
You've got roots stretching back thousands of years, spanning all these different regions, to claim that this one event, the Khazar conversion, somehow overwrites all of that.
Right.
It's just a vast oversimplification.
Yeah. So genetics is just one piece of the puzzle. We can't overinterpret the data.
Right.
But you mentioned something even crazier. about the Khazars influencing, like, revolutions.
Oh, yeah, that's another big one.
So what's the story there?
Well, get this. Some people are claiming that the Khazars, or their descendants, were somehow behind the Bolshevik Revolution and even the French Revolution.
Really?
Yeah.
But those revolutions were, like, driven by so many different factors.
Exactly.
You know, social stuff, economics, politics. To suggest the Khazars orchestrated all of that.
Yeah.
From centuries ago.
Oh, it's pretty wild.
That's nuts.
It's another example of taking something really complex, a historical event, and trying to force a really simple and frankly harmful narrative onto it. It completely ignores the agency of the people who actually lived through these revolutions, their struggles.
Their own ideas.
Yeah. It's a disservice to history.
So it sounds like we need to be pretty skeptical of these claims about the Khazars' influence.
Definitely. We can't let speculation and unfounded claims overshadow the real history of the Khazars and their place in the world. They were a fascinating empire, really complex, and their story deserves to be told accurately, respectfully.
Absolutely. So just to recap, the Khazars' powerful empire, conversion to Judaism, is still a puzzle. And the claims about their influence should be taken with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But there's more to this.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Definitely.
How have these stories about the Khazars been used, like in modern times? And what are the implications of that? I mean, that's a whole other can of worms.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to have to unpack all of that in part 2 of our deep dive.
Yeah. And, you know, it's a really important discussion to have because, as we'll see, these seemingly obscure historical debates can have very real consequences in the present day. Unfortunately, some of them can even be pretty harmful.
Welcome back to our deep dives into the Khazar Empire.
We're back.
In part 1, we talked about their rise to power, their conversion to Judaism, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But now it's getting kind of controversial, right, Nick?
Yeah. Things get a little bit more complicated when we start to see how these historical narratives are used today.
Especially like when you're talking about identity and who belongs where.
Exactly. And one of the most concerning ways I've seen the Khazar narrative used is to question the historical connection of Jewish people to the land of Israel.
Wait, really? I don't see the connection.
So the argument goes, if European Jews are largely descended from these Khazar converts, then they aren't the real descendants of the ancient Israelites.
Oh, okay.
And so therefore, their claim to Israel is illegitimate.
Wow, that's a bold claim.
It is.
To say the least. It's like trying to rewrite history.
Yeah, it's trying to rewrite history, erase a connection that has existed for centuries.
Yeah, and Jewish identity is so much more than just like one thing. You know.
Right. It's religion, it's culture, it's historical experiences, and it's this deep ancestral connection.
Yeah. So to use the Khazars to try and like break that connection to Israel, it's, like you said, a huge oversimplification.
Absolutely.
But this idea of Jewish people being imposters or outsiders, like, that's not a new thing, is it?
Unfortunately not.
Like, we've seen this before.
We have these anti-Semitic tropes have been around for centuries.
Really?
Yeah, and the Khazar theory is just like a new version of that.
Wow. So it's like the same harmful ideas just repackaged.
Exactly. It's a way of othering an entire group of people, creating this fake distinction between real Jews and these so-called Khazar imposters.
And it's not just about rewriting history. It's like this has real-world consequences, too.
It absolutely does. These types of narratives fuel prejudice and discrimination, even violence.
Yeah. That's scary.
Yeah.
So how do we even fight back against these ideas? I mean, we can't just erase history or tell people what to believe.
No, you can't. It's not about erasing history. It's about engaging with it critically and responsibly. And I think education is key.
Okay, what does that look like?
We need to teach critical thinking skills and media literacy, particularly in the age of the internet, because that's where misinformation can spread so quickly.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
We need to be able to analyze information and figure out what's true and what's not.
Oh, I see. So it's about giving people the tools to be more discerning.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. What else can we do?
Well, I think making sure history is taught in a way that's both accurate and engaging is really important.
Engage.
Yeah, because when we present history as just a bunch of dry facts and dates, it's easy for these harmful narratives to sneak in.
I get it. It's got to be interesting.
Right. Because history, when it's done right, it's fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. There's so many amazing stories.
There are.
Human triumphs, tragedies, conflict, innovation. It's about understanding who we are. How we got here.
And when we approach history with the kind of curiosity, with critical thinking and a willingness to be wrong, We become less susceptible to these distortions.
Yeah, okay.
We're more informed, and we can navigate the complexities of the world.
So it's not just about memorizing facts and dates.
No.
It's like a mindset.
It's a way of thinking.
Understanding that the past isn't just some irrelevant thing that happened way back when.
Right. It shapes who we are.
Yeah, it influences us today.
Exactly.
I like that. But you know what? Even though we're being pretty critical of this whole Khazar thing, there's still a point the video makes that I think is worth talking about.
Oh, what's that?
It's this idea that we shouldn't be blaming entire groups of people for negative actions.
Right.
Even if we don't agree with everything else the video says,
Right.
I think that's an important principle to remember.
Absolutely. It's a principle that applies to so many different situations. It doesn't matter if we're talking about the Khazars or conflicts happening today. We can't just make sweeping generalizations.
Right. We have to remember that every group is diverse.
Exactly. There are so many different views and experiences within any population.
So it's like a reminder to be more understanding and empathetic.
Yes, and to really listen to different perspectives.
We can't just paint a whole group with one brushstroke.
Right, because that ignores the nuances of human experience, and it just perpetuates harmful stereotypes.
Yeah. And conflicts are rarely ever as simple as just like us versus them.
Right. There are always deeper issues at play, political, economic, social.
Yeah. We can't ignore that stuff.
If we want to find lasting peace, we need to address those root causes.
So even though we have to be cautious about people trying to rewrite history or use the past to justify prejudice, there are still valuable lessons to be learned from how we approach historical narratives.
Absolutely. And I think that leads us perfectly into the final part of our deep dive, where we're going to consider the implications of everything we've discussed and how we can engage with history in a more responsible way.
Welcome back to our deep dive. It's the final part of our exploration of the Khazars.
Yeah, we've covered a lot. Their rise and fall, their conversion to Judaism, all those claims about their lasting impact.
It just goes to show that history is rarely simple, right?
It really isn't. And the Khazars are a great example of that. But this idea of reinterpreting the past to fit a narrative, that's something you see all the time.
It makes you wonder, what can we even do about it? We can't go back in time, get a perfect record of everything.
No, we can't. So how do we navigate all this as people who just want to understand what happened?
Yeah, it can feel overwhelming.
It can. I think the first step is just acknowledging that history is always going to be an interpretation.
An interpretation.
To some extent, yeah. We have to rely on sources, documents, artifacts, and all of those things. They were created by people.
Oh, I see. So there's always going to be some bias baked in.
There is some level of subjectivity, perspective.
That's not like math.
Exactly. There's not just one right answer.
Right.
And recognizing that subjectivity, it's crucial.
But that doesn't mean we just give up, right?
No. It doesn't mean all history is fake or anything, but it does mean we have to be critical.
Okay. So how do we do that? How do we become more critical thinkers when it comes to history?
Start by asking questions. Who wrote this? What's their background? What were their motivations? Were there other perspectives that weren't included?
Okay, so really dig into it. Don't just take things at face value.
Exactly. Be curious, but also be skeptical in a good way.
I like that.
And try to find multiple perspectives. If you're only getting one side of the story, you're probably missing something.
It's like that saying, there are 3 sides to every story, yours, mine, and the truth.
Exactly. And sometimes that truth is somewhere in the middle.
Right.
And that's where the real learning happens, when we can hold those different perspectives, consider all the complexities, without trying to oversimplify.
So even though the Khazars are fascinating, and there's still so much we don't know, the real lesson is bigger than that.
It is. It's about how we approach history in general.
Right. They're just one example of how history can be interpreted and reinterpreted, even distorted.
Yeah.
So we have to be aware of that, ask questions, engage with the past honestly, but also respectfully.
Respect the complexities of human experience.
It's not just dates and facts. It's a living narrative that shapes how we see the world, how we see ourselves.
And it's a narrative we're all a part of, whether we realize it or not. By engaging with history thoughtfully, critically, we can learn so much about ourselves, about the world around us.
And maybe even make better choices for the future. I think that's a great place to wrap up. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the Khazars. We hope you'll keep questioning, keep exploring, keep learning.
Remember, the past is never truly past. It lives on in us, in our stories, our cultures, the choices we make every day. By understanding the past, we can understand ourselves better and the world around us.